thank you very much, Jackie and the CEC, for inviting me to launch the 2026 Clean Energy Solutions Index at this conference. This is our annual measure of what Australians really feel about clean energy solutions, and what we're trying to do with this work is measure deep support. And there's been so much talk this morning about the importance of trust in the renewable energy transition, and the index provides a lot of understanding about what is driving trust and what's the barrier of trust as well. So, the index measures deep support for 11 different clean energy solutions across 3 broad areas, so home, infrastructure and industry. And it looks at how strongly Australians support each solution, how resilient that support is. For the methodology, there's all the solutions we measure. We would love to measure more, and we'd certainly love to measure some of the emerging technologies, but we have to ask a lot of questions to a lot of people to be able to get what we call a deep support score. And this kind of goes to the question of social licence in many ways. In order for there to be deep support for a renewable energy solution, you have to have a sense that you personally support it, that you think it's good for the country, but that you also think that your community supports it, which is really critical for kind of advocacy. And so you'll see in the work that emerges out of the index that there is often a gap between personal support and believing your community supports it. And out of that, we get a 1-number score, which is importantly not a percentage. There we are. For the methodology nerds here, this is what the actual research was based on, a 10-minute survey. It's not that we have anything against the ACT or the Northern Territory, but we didn't include them because we really do want to boost for those big states and places like Queensland and WA as well, to be able to adequately create a support score for each state as well. So what has happened in the first wave of the index was last year. What has happened in the last 12 months? Well, we've seen an increased support score of 1. That might seem pretty modest, but remember, it's not a percentage, it's a support score. So we're headed in the right direction. But as almost all the talks this morning re-emphasised, unless we build deep trust in the community that the energy transition is going to be beneficial and that community support it, I think we'll continue to have this kind of slow, steady, incremental improvement in deep support that won't get us where we need to be. My hypothesis is we need to be at least at a 70% deep support score so that the community politics and the national politics follow. We also have individual solution scores for each of the technologies, and you can see some significant jumps there in batteries, mainly because of the incredible uptake of batteries and obviously the right government policy options there. You've also got an increase in support for electric vehicles and a small increase for transmission as well, which is, a good thing. But what we're finding with transmission is an increased sense of personal support and national support, but more tentative about whether the community supports transmission as well. You're also seeing there in many cases a levelling or perhaps depression for support for anything to do with shifting away from gas. And certainly in the qualitative research that we're doing, there's this sense of that we perhaps need to lean into gas more as we go through the transition to renewable energy. That's got a lot to do with the lack of confidence Australians have that the transmission is being well planned and that local communities are benefiting from it, as well as a sense that that we're not as far along the track, a lack of recognition that we're as far along the track with energy transition than we actually are. We're also able to calculate the state deep support score, and you can see there Queensland at the bottom and Tasmania, South Australia doing well as WA. I'm going to have a chance to talk to Jackie about some of the overall insights from the research, but I wanted to pick out a few of them that's important. I mean, obviously we've seen increased deep support for solutions that people can touch and feel and bring about immediate benefit. And certainly in the qualitative research we do, this notion of energy independence and energy security and sovereignty is working extremely well, particularly for people who are not primarily motivated to support renewable energy because they're concerned around climate. But we are also getting lots and lots of anxiety about how large-scale renewable energy infrastructure is rolling out across the country. People say, is there a plan? People say a community is really supportive. Are community benefits being distributed evenly? And this is not just the kinds of questions that are being asked in rural and regional Australia. There's increasing anxiety in the cities that it's not being accepted in the country. So we have found both in the renewable energy, in the Clean Energy Index, as well as the broader stuff that we're doing, is that those people living in the cities think we need to go faster, but when asked about whether the country feels the same way as they do, they say no, there's more resistance. So we have a kind of a push and pull impact being felt across the community in terms of sentiment. We are also finding numerous gaps in the data. So for example, we have a sense in which people are constantly underestimating how much renewable energy is currently in the system. So that puts a dampener on confidence about how fast we can go. There is, of course, that perception gap that I've talked about in terms of whether people think that their personal support is something that is shared by the broader community. And again, in the cities, a sense that there is much less support in the country. Closing these gaps, nailing the financial case for renewable energy, nailing the engagement at a local level is absolutely critical to make sure that when I front up next year with this data, that we are seeing more than just a 1 score increase in the deep support for renewable energy transition in this country. It is everything that was said this morning about the sense of trust and the lack of trust that the renewable energy transition is going to benefit the country and benefit individual households equally, and that's going to be distributed equally, is the thing that's putting downward pressure on deep support for the transition. There is an interactive dashboard, so all of the data is available on that, both the 2025 data and soon to be the 2026 data, particularly if you're interested in deep support across the state or across solutions or any demographic differences is there. And the report itself is available if you want to look at that QR code. It's available just for people attending this conference for the next 2 days, and then will be available on the website later in the week. There's a lot of detail in it, and this was a piece of work designed specifically for people like you in the room, developers and policymakers and people who are living and breathing everything to do with all of these clean energy solutions in Australia, to really understand what deep support is, to understand the barriers and drivers of deep support and what we need to do about it. Thank you very much.
Well, firstly, thank you. Thank you so much for giving us a peek on the next Solutions Index report. Yeah. I think I was there for the first one.
You were.
I was newly minted in this job. Absolutely. And the Minister, Chris Bowen, came along. Yeah. And I know that this research is something that government pays very close attention to, and the Minister particularly. So I guess I want to start off with a personal question. And as a social researcher, were you disappointed to see how little support or deep support had grown in that time?
I mean, I think that when we come to community sentiment about energy transition, there's a little bit of a 1 step forward, 1 step back, sidestep. So what you saw is I absolutely thought we were going to get increased deep support for batteries just because of the combination of solar and battery. And you know, we were in field when petrol prices started to go up. And you suddenly saw in the groups people going, oh, should I get an electric vehicle? And, you know, maybe, and then suddenly overcome quite a lot of those obstacles all of a sudden. I was a little bit surprised at a slight increase in transmission. I think that's playing out in many ways in the focus groups about people realising, well, if we're going to generate all this stuff, it needs to move around. But to your point, and as you said so articulately this morning and was followed up by the speeches afterwards, we will kind of have little steps forward just because of the sense of at least in principle support for energy transition until we build what deep support really looks like. And deep support requires consistency, it requires lived experience of benefit, and really building the trust from the community up and the top down. And of course, the thing at the moment that people need is make things as simple as possible and as impactful as possible. So I was really excited to hear what you had to say in your speech this morning about making community benefit and those kind of payments to local councils. It's a really important first step into communicating to the broader community, those people who are living and breathing, particularly large-scale renewable energy transmission, as well as everybody who might be a renter, who might be, am I going to be a part of this this change or not? It's absolutely essential. We are so behind the 8 ball in building that trust. And to come back to answer your question, we will progress slowly in the right direction unless we address this. I would like leaps and bounds. I would like little, leaps and bounds to get us to. I hope we're at 70 within the next 5 years. And if we're not at a 70 deep support score in the next 5 years, I feel it would be very hard to kind of put that genie back in the bottle.
Well, getting to that score of 70 in 5 years seems incredibly ambitious.
It does.
And look, I've been involved in politics. You've had a look at, very long-term social research, so you understand how difficult it is moving the dial on what people think and the level of support that you can drive. So I think one of the questions I have for you, and I think it would really help our audience to understand, what helps to grow that support? We talked about payments this morning. We talked about the simplicity of the message, things that people could touch, taste and feel in terms of the transition. But in terms of the conversations that we're having with people, we're having with communities, we're having with landholders, in terms of the conversations that we're having amongst ourselves, in terms of changing the conversation in communities, what changes people's minds, or what helps to break down, I think, a lot of the distrust that's sown by mis and disinformation?
I suppose the first thing we hear from communities when we ask them what they want from the renewable energy transition, rural and regional communities are often like, first of all, do no harm, and then ask us what we need. Don't assume. And I know that that's difficult. I'm not Pollyanna-ish about that. I believe that most local communities have a sense of what they need to thrive, and so how can developers and anybody working renewable energy transition come in and have that conversation? We're part of your future and what that looks like. That goes to how you do consultation as well as what you deliver. I think addressing some of the concerns people have about how uneven the benefits of the renewable energy transition will be. So who's going to be left behind, and how do you address what needs to be left behind? And I think leaning into the kinds of things that people worry about right now, hence the kind of language we're talking around, energy security and energy sovereignty, very important. I think if I look at the index, people are going to continue regardless of adopting household solutions, particularly if the policy settings are right. Where they are stumbling is on in large-scale renewable energy projects. And how they all come together and what the plan is. And so if this time next year we weren't further progressed with, we hadn't, the deep support for transmission wasn't where it was supposed to be, and if we were still had downward pressure on anything to do with gas, we'd be in real trouble. But I would also say that if we continue to see this widening gap between, I think this is a good idea and good for the country, but I think the rest of Australia doesn't want it. Closing that perception gap is pretty critical. And you only do that, you don't do that by saying to people, everybody supports it. You do it by just actually doing it in the community, and people think, oh, this is working really well. And when you were talking this morning and you were talking about the farmer and the Darling Downs, is it? I was thinking about, for anybody who spends a lot of time in rural and regional Australia, particularly I think about towns that were built during the gold rush.
Yeah.
You wander around those towns and you think, look at these extraordinary civic buildings that they've got in this town. This was all built off the back of gold.
Yep.
And sometimes I think in 70 years, will I be wandering around regional Australia and thinking, wind farms built this community hall?
Yeah.
Or wind farm, that's what we really need to do.
Yep.
We want to have really tangible things that communities can live and breathe in for a really long time, that makes them think, whatever the country was asking of my community to deal with, whether it be disrupted roads or whatever that might be, was worth it, because look at what we can enjoy in, for the next 50 or 60 years. So if I think about that, that's what I would like this particular moment in time to bring about, that sense of, you and I wandering around some regional place looking for a coffee and thinking, oh my God, there's this huge conference being, or whatever, or this huge writers' festival being held.
Gladstone Writers' Festival.
Exactly, being held in this incredible state-of-the-art building built off the back of renewables.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Join with me in thanking Rebecca Huntley.
Thanks.